Sometimes the people closest to us become the very ones we should fear most. For 26-year-old Zuri Wolfe, that realization came in the sterile white office of Dr. Martinez, when a simple blood test revealed a betrayal so shocking it would shatter everything she believed about family, trust, and survival. What started as routine cardiac monitoring for her congenital heart condition became the moment Zuri discovered that for months, someone she trusted had been systematically replacing her life-saving medication with harmless vitamins. The person responsible? Her sister-in-law, Madison, the woman who had moved into Zuri's Denver apartment 6 months earlier, claiming she needed a fresh start after her divorce. But this story isn't just about medical sabotage. It's about a young woman's journey from victim to victor, about finding strength in the darkest moments, and about learning that sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the most profound transformations.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Zuri Wolfe had always been different from other 26-year-olds, though she'd spent most of her life trying not to let it show. Born with a rare congenital heart defect called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, she'd undergone 3 major surgeries before her 5th birthday and had been on the strict regimen of heart medications ever since. The small white pills in their amber bottles had become as routine as brushing her teeth. Carvedilol for her blood pressure, digoxin for her heart rhythm, and warfarin to prevent blood clots. Despite her medical challenges, Zuri had built a life she was proud of. She worked as a graphic designer for a boutique marketing firm in downtown Denver, creating vibrant campaigns for local businesses. Her colleagues knew about her condition, but rarely treated her differently, exactly how she preferred it. She'd learned early that pity was more suffocating than any physical limitation her heart could impose. Her apartment in the trendy Rhino district reflected her personality, walls covered with her own artwork, plants thriving in every corner, and a collection of vintage cameras she had inherited from her grandfather. It was her sanctuary, a space where she could control every detail, something that mattered deeply to someone whose body had never been entirely under her own command. The routine of her daily life was carefully calibrated. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, Zuri would take her medications with a glass of water and a small piece of toast. She learned through trial and error that taking them on an empty stomach made her nauseous, and the timing had to be precise. Dr. Chen, her longtime cardiologist, had emphasized that consistency was crucial for maintaining stable levels in her bloodstream. Her exercise routine was similarly regimented. 3 times a week, she attended a specialized cardiac rehabilitation program at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. The other participants were mostly older adults recovering from heart attacks or surgery, but Zuri had found community there. Martha, a 72-year-old retired teacher, had become something of a mentor, always asking about Zuri's latest design projects and sharing stories from her 40 years in the classroom. "You've got more fight in you than people twice your age," Martha would often say during their cool-down stretches. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." It was advice Zuri tried to live by, though some days were harder than others. The fatigue that came with her condition was unpredictable. She could feel energetic and strong in the morning, only to find herself struggling to climb the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment by evening. She had learned to plan her most demanding work projects for her better days, and to never schedule important meetings after 3 p.m. Her family had always been supportive, if sometimes overprotective. Her parents, Robert and Diana Wolfe, lived in Colorado Springs and called every Sunday without fail. Her older brother, Marcus, a software engineer in Seattle, visited twice a year and sent care packages filled with herbal teas and supplements that Zuri politely accepted but rarely used. She learned to be cautious about anything that might interact with her prescription medications. Marcus had married Madison Chen 3 years ago, a whirlwind romance that began when they met at a tech conference in Austin. Madison was beautiful in an effortless way, tall and lean with perfectly straight black hair that never seemed to have a strand out of place. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveling frequently for work, and always seemed to have insider knowledge about the latest medical treatments and wellness trends. Initially, Zuri had liked Madison well enough. She was charming and vivacious, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. But there had always been something about her sister-in-law that Zuri couldn't quite put her finger on. A calculating quality behind the warm smiles, the way she would ask probing questions about Zuri's medical condition and treatment plan. The marriage between Marcus and Madison began showing cracks by the second year. Marcus, naturally introverted and methodical, seemed increasingly exhausted by Madison's need for constant stimulation and social interaction. Their arguments, when they visited Denver, were conducted in tense whispers, but Zuri could sense the underlying tension. When Madison called in tears 6 months ago explaining that she and Marcus were separating and she needed somewhere to stay while she figured out her next steps, Zuri's first instinct was to say no. Her apartment was her carefully maintained sanctuary, and the idea of sharing that space felt overwhelming. But family was family, and Madison promised it would only be temporary, just a few weeks while she found her own place in Denver. "She just needs some time to reset," Madison had said, her voice shaky with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only person I trust right now. Marcus and we need space to figure things out."
Those few weeks had stretched into 6 months. Madison paid rent religiously and kept the common areas clean, but her presence had changed the entire dynamic of Zuri's home. She was helpful, perhaps too helpful. She insisted on doing the grocery shopping, claiming she enjoyed it and had more flexible hours than Zuri. She organized the medicine cabinet, arranging everything by category and expiration date. She even started preparing healthy meals, explaining that her background in pharmaceutical sales had taught her about nutrition and drug interactions. "You shouldn't have to worry about all these little details," Madison would say, waving away Zuri's protests. "I'm here to help. Let me take care of the boring stuff so you can focus on your art and your career." At first, Zuri appreciated the help. Her energy levels were unpredictable, and coming home to a prepared meal or finding her prescription refills already picked up from the pharmacy felt like a genuine kindness. Madison seemed to understand the complexities of managing a chronic condition in ways that even well-meaning friends and family members didn't. But gradually, subtle changes began to creep into Zuri's routine. Madison would remind her about medication times, sometimes bringing the pills to her with a glass of water. She'd reorganize the medicine cabinet weekly, claiming she was checking expiration dates and ensuring everything was properly stored. She'd accompany Zuri to some of her doctor's appointments, asking detailed questions about dosages and side effects. "I find medical stuff fascinating," Madison would explain, when Zuri occasionally felt overwhelmed by her sister-in-law's intense interest in her treatment plan. "It's probably because of my work in pharma. I just want to make sure you're getting the best possible care." The changes in Zuri's physical condition were so gradual that she initially attributed them to stress. The separation between Marcus and Madison was affecting the entire family, and Zuri had thrown herself into work as a distraction. She was tired more often, finding it harder to concentrate during the day and needing more sleep at night. Her heart would occasionally race for no apparent reason, leaving her feeling anxious and unsettled. During her workout sessions at cardiac rehab, she noticed she was getting winded more quickly than usual. Martha, ever observant, commented on it during one of their sessions. "You seem a little off your game lately, honey. Everything okay at home?" Zuri had brushed off the concern, explaining about the family stress and her increased workload. But privately, she was beginning to worry. Her last appointment with Dr. Chen had been routine. He'd been her cardiologist for 15 years and knew her case better than anyone. He'd noted that her blood pressure was slightly elevated, but attributed it to stress and recommended some relaxation techniques. What neither Zuri nor Dr. Chen realized was that the medications she'd been taking so faithfully every morning for the past 4 months weren't medications at all. And their amber prescription bottles, carefully labeled with her name and the correct drug information, were vitamin B12 tablets and calcium supplements, harmless to a healthy person, but potentially deadly to someone with Zuri's cardiac condition. The switch had been so expertly done that even a close examination wouldn't reveal the deception. Madison, with her pharmaceutical background, knew exactly how to source vitamins that matched the size, shape, and color of Zuri's actual medications. She'd been systematically replacing the contents of each bottle during her weekly organization sessions, disposing of the real medications and refilling the containers with carefully selected supplements. As Zuri's symptoms gradually worsened, the increased fatigue, the irregular heartbeats, the subtle but growing sense that something was wrong with her body, Madison played the role of the concerned caregiver perfectly. She'd suggest maybe Zuri was working too hard or that the stress of the family situation was taking a toll. She'd bring herbal teas and encourage more rest, all while maintaining the facade of someone genuinely invested in Zuri's well-being. The most insidious part of the deception was how it exploited Zuri's own knowledge of her condition. She knew that stress could exacerbate her symptoms, that changes in routine could throw off her carefully maintained balance. When she started feeling worse, it seemed logical to attribute it to the upheaval in her life, rather than to suspect that someone was systematically poisoning her through neglect. But the human body can only compensate for so long when essential medications are withdrawn. Her heart, which had been functioning relatively well with pharmaceutical support, was beginning to struggle without the drugs that regulated its rhythm and prevented dangerous clots from forming. The symptoms she was experiencing weren't just stress responses, they were warning signs of a cardiac system under increasing strain. As the 6-month mark of Madison's temporary stay approached, Zuri was finally beginning to admit to herself that something was seriously wrong. The woman she'd trusted to help manage her medical routine, the sister-in-law who claimed to care about her well-being, had been slowly and methodically undermining the very foundation of her health. But Zuri didn't know that yet. She was still operating under the assumption that her pills were keeping her alive, that her support system was intact, and that her growing symptoms were just another challenge to overcome in her lifelong battle with her heart condition. The truth, shocking, deliberate, and potentially fatal, was still hidden behind amber plastic and false concern. That truth would soon be revealed in the most unexpected way, through a routine blood test that would change everything Zuri thought she knew about trust, family, and survival.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday in Zuri's carefully orchestrated routine, but it would end with her world completely shattered. She woke to the sound of her alarm at 6:45 a.m., immediately reaching for the water glass on her nightstand, a habit developed over 2 decades of morning medication rituals. Madison was already up, as usual, preparing what had become their shared breakfast routine. "Morning, sleepyhead," Madison called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that perpetually cheerful tone that had begun to grate on Zuri's nerves lately. "I made steel-cut oats with blueberries. The antioxidants are supposed to be great for heart health." Zuri padded to the kitchen, noting how Madison had already arranged her morning pills next to a small glass of orange juice, another recent addition to the routine that Madison claimed would help with vitamin absorption. The pills looked exactly as they always did, the small white Cardiologist, the oval yellow digoxin, and the pale blue warfarin. Zuri had memorized their shapes and colors years ago, a safety habit Dr. Chen had taught her when she was still a teenager. "Thanks," Zuri murmured, swallowing the pills without really looking. After 26 years, the motion was as automatic as breathing. But as she reached for her coffee, a sharp pain shot through her chest. Not the familiar ache she sometimes experienced, but something more acute and alarming. Madison was immediately at her side. "Are you okay? You look pale." The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving Zuri questioning whether it had been real at all. "I'm fine. Probably just slept wrong." But she wasn't fine, and deep down, she knew it. The episodes were becoming more frequent. Sharp pains, moments of dizziness, nights when her heart would race so fast she could hear it pounding in her ears. She'd been attributing it all to stress, to the tension of living with Madison, to the demanding project she was working on for a high-profile client. Now, standing in her kitchen with the familiar taste of her medication still on her tongue, she made a decision that would change everything. "I think I should call Dr. Chen, schedule a checkup."
Madison's reaction was immediate and intense. Is that really necessary? I mean, you just saw him 3 months ago. These doctors love to over-medicalize everything. Maybe you just need a vacation. The vehemence in Madison's response surprised Zuri. Her sister-in-law had always been supportive of her medical care before, even overly interested in the details. This sudden pivot to discouraging professional consultation felt jarring and wrong. I know my body, Madison. Something's not right. Madison's expression shifted, the mask of concern slipping slightly to reveal something harder underneath. Of course you know best. I just worry about you being constantly anxious about every little symptom. It can't be good for your stress levels. But Zuri had made up her mind. As soon as Madison left for work, she'd landed a temporary position with a medical device company in Thornton. Zuri called Dr. Chen's office. The receptionist, recognizing her voice after 15 years of regular appointments, managed to squeeze her in for that afternoon. Dr. Chen had a cancellation at 2:30, Rebecca, the receptionist explained. He said to tell you that if you're concerned enough to call, he wants to see you as soon as possible. The morning dragged by as Zuri tried to focus on work. She was designing a rebranding package for a local coffee roastery, but the vibrant logos and warm color palettes she usually loved creating felt flat and lifeless on her screen. Every few minutes, she'd find herself pressing her hand to her chest, trying to monitor her heartbeat, wondering if the irregular rhythm she thought she felt was real or imagined. At lunch, she called her brother Marcus in Seattle. It was the first time they'd spoken since the separation, and his voice carried a weariness that made her heart ache for reasons beyond her physical condition. "Hey, Zuri, how are you holding up? I know having Madison there has been, an adjustment. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I'm having some health issues, and I'm starting to wonder if the stress of the living situation is making things worse." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of health issues?" Zuri described the increased fatigue, the chest pains, the racing heartbeat at night. As she talked, she realized how much worse she'd done and for how long she'd been dismissing the symptoms. "Zuri, that sounds serious. Have you talked to your doctor?" "I have an appointment this afternoon, but Marcus, I think maybe Madison needs to find her own place. I know you guys are working things out, but I can't keep doing this." Another long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was strained. "There's something I need to tell you about Madison, something I probably should have said months ago." The tone in her brother's voice made Zuri's chest tighten with anxiety. "What do you mean?" "The reason we separated, it wasn't just because we grew apart. I found out she'd been manipulating things. Small things at first. She'd hide my anxiety medication and then find it when I was panicking about losing it. She'd change the temperature settings and then act concerned when I'd complain about being too hot or cold. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but I started to feel like I was losing my mind."
Zuri's hand gripped the phone tighter. "Why didn't you tell me this before I let her move in?" "Because I thought I was going crazy. Because she's so good at making everything seem like caring, like love. And because I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. She's got this way of making you doubt your own perceptions." The conversation ended with Marcus promising to help find Madison alternative housing arrangements, but Zuri was left with a cold knot of dread in her stomach. The patterns he described, the helpful concern that felt somehow wrong, the way Madison always seemed to be managing situations rather than simply supporting them, rang uncomfortably true. Dr. Chen's office was located in a medical complex near Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, where Zuri had spent so many days as a child. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of medical equipment usually comforted her, reminders that she was in capable hands. Today, though, everything felt ominous. Dr. Eduardo Chin had been her cardiologist since she was 11 years old, taking over her care when his predecessor retired. He was a slight man with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he knew her medical history better than she knew it herself. When she walked into his office, his expression immediately grew concerned. "Zuri, you look tired. Tell me what's been going on."
She described the symptoms, the timeline, the growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with her body. Dr. Chen listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his brow furrowing with increasing concern. "I want to run a comprehensive blood panel," he said finally. "Your symptoms could indicate several different issues, medication interactions, dosage problems, or changes in your condition that we need to address immediately." "Medication interactions? But I haven't changed anything. I take the same pills at the same time every day, just like always." "That's exactly why I want to check your blood levels. If you're taking your medications consistently but experiencing these symptoms, we need to understand what's happening at the cellular level." The blood draw was routine. Zuri had been giving blood for medical tests her entire life. But as she watched the dark red liquid fill the vials, she felt an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Something was about to be revealed, something that would change everything. "I'll put a rush on these results," Dr. Chen assured her. "I should have preliminary findings by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful. If you experience any severe chest pain or shortness of breath, go to the emergency room immediately. Don't wait." That evening, Madison seemed unusually attentive, asking detailed questions about the appointment and appearing almost anxious about what the doctor might have said. When Zuri mentioned the blood tests, Madison's reaction was swift and alarming. "Blood tests? Why would he need blood tests? That seems like overkill for some minor symptoms." "Madison, I have a serious heart condition. Blood tests are routine when there are changes in symptoms. I just think doctors sometimes order unnecessary tests to cover themselves legally. The healthcare system is so broken that way." But even as Madison spoke, Zuri noticed her sister-in-law's hands were shaking slightly as she organized the dinner dishes. For someone advocating against medical overcaution, she seemed remarkably nervous about the prospect of Zuri's test results. That night, Zuri lay awake listening to the sound of her heartbeat, wondering what the tests would reveal. She thought about her conversation with Marcus, about the subtle wrongness she'd been sensing in Madison's behavior, about the growing disconnect between how she was supposed to be feeling on her medications versus how she actually felt. In the room next door, Madison was also awake, staring at her phone screen as she researched how long it would take for certain medications to clear someone's bloodstream entirely. The careful plan she had been executing for months was about to be exposed, and she was running out of time to control the narrative. Neither woman slept that night, both knowing instinctively that the morning would bring revelations that would shatter the carefully constructed fiction of their shared living arrangement. The blood flowing through Zuri's veins would tell the story that Madison had been desperately trying to hide, a story of betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. The catalyst had been set in motion. By tomorrow afternoon, Zuri would know the truth about the pills she'd been faithfully taking, about the sister-in-law she'd trusted with her life, and about how close she'd come to dying from kindness that was anything but kind. The comfortable lies were about to crumble, replaced with a truth so shocking it would force Zuri to question everything she thought she knew about trust, family, and survival.
The phone call came at 9:47 a.m. on Wednesday morning while Zuri was attempting to focus on a client presentation. Dr. Chen's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the underlying tension that made her stomach drop before he even spoke the words that would change everything. "Zuri, I need you to come in immediately. The blood test results, they're concerning. Very concerning." "What kind of concerning?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you be here within the hour? And Zuri, don't take any medications until we talk." The drive to Dr. Chen's office felt surreal. Denver's autumn morning was crisp and beautiful, the kind of day that usually lifted her spirits, but Zuri barely registered the golden aspen leaves or the clear mountain views. Madison had left early for a sales meeting in Boulder, but not before making her usual fuss about Zuri's morning pills that were now sitting untouched on the kitchen counter per Dr. Chen's instructions. Dr. Chen's expression when she entered his office confirmed her worst fears. He had her blood work printed out, multiple pages covered in numbers and medical abbreviations that meant nothing to her but clearly meant everything to him. "Zuri, I've been your doctor for 15 years. In all that time, your medication compliance has been exemplary. Your blood levels have always been exactly where they should be. He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. According to these results, you haven't taken your heart medications in months. Not only are the therapeutic levels completely absent from your bloodstream, but some of the numbers suggest you've never been on these medications at all. The room seemed to tilt sideways. That's impossible. I take them every morning at exactly 7. I haven't missed a dose in years. I know. That's what makes this so alarming. Dr. Chen leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. Zuri, I need you to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has anyone else had access to your medications? Anyone who might have altered them? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. Images flashed through Zuri's mind. Madison reorganizing the medicine cabinet weekly. Madison picking up prescription refills. Madison bringing her the pills each morning with such caring attention. The conversation with Marcus echoed in her memory, his description of feeling like he was losing his mind, of small manipulations that seemed loving but left him questioning his own reality. My sister-in-law. She's been living with me for 6 months. She helps with everything, including my medications. Dr. Chen's face darkened. Zuri, what you're describing could constitute attempted murder. If someone has been systematically replacing your heart medications, they've put your life in immediate danger. Your heart could have gone into failure at any time over the past few months. The word murder hit her like a physical blow. Murder. Not negligence, not a mistake, but deliberate, calculated murder. The sister-in-law who made her breakfast, who asked about her day, who seemed so concerned about her health, had been slowly killing her. I need to call the police, Dr. Chen continued. But first, we need to get you stabilized. Your heart rhythm is already irregular, and your blood pressure is dangerously elevated. I'm admitting you to the hospital immediately. No. The word came out more forcefully than Zuri intended. I can't go to the hospital. Not yet. I need to go home first. I need to see the pills to confirm what we're both thinking. Zuri, that could be extremely dangerous. And if your suspicions are correct, confronting the person responsible could put you in even more danger. But Zuri was already standing, her mind racing with a clarity she hadn't experienced in months. The fog that had been clouding her thoughts, the fatigue that had been dragging her down, it was all starting to make sense. Without the medications regulating her heart function, her body had been slowly failing, and she'd been attributing the symptoms to stress. Dr. Chen, I need 1 hour. 1 hour to get evidence before I call the police. If Madison has been doing this, I need proof. And I need her to think everything is normal until I can get that proof. Dr. Chen reluctantly agreed, but only after making her promise to take a temporary dose of fast-acting medication and to call 911 if she experienced any severe symptoms. He also insisted on sending a nurse practitioner, Janet Rodriguez, to accompany her, someone who could both provide medical support and serve as a witness to whatever they might discover. The drive home was a blur of rage and disbelief. Janet, a competent woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, kept checking Zuri's pulse and asking about her symptoms while navigating the Denver traffic with surprising skill. I've seen medical abuse cases before, she said quietly, as they pulled into Zuri's neighborhood. It's more common than people think, especially within families. The perpetrators often justify it to themselves as helping or protecting their victims. But why would Madison want to hurt me? I gave her a place to stay when her marriage fell apart. I've been nothing but supportive. That's exactly why these cases are so devastating. The victims trust completely, which makes the abuse possible. And sometimes the perpetrators are motivated by things that have nothing to do with their victims. Control, attention, psychological satisfaction from playing the caregiver role. Zuri's apartment looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. Neat, welcoming, completely normal. But now, everything felt sinister. The cheerful yellow kitchen where Madison prepared their shared meals, the bathroom where Madison had organized the medicine cabinet with such care, the living room where they'd watched Netflix together just last night, all of it tainted by the possibility of betrayal.
The medicine cabinet was Madison's masterpiece of organization. Each prescription bottle was arranged by size, with a detailed chart she'd created showing dosing schedules and refill dates. To anyone looking casually, it appeared to be the work of someone exceptionally caring and thorough. Janet put on latex gloves before handling the bottles. We'll need to preserve the evidence exactly as it is, but I can do a preliminary examination. She opened the first bottle, Zuri's Cardiologist, and poured a few pills into her palm. "These aren't Cardiologist," she said immediately. "They're the right size and color, but the markings are wrong. These look like vitamin B12 tablets." The digoxin bottle contained what appeared to be calcium supplements. The warfarin, the blood thinner that prevented deadly clots from forming in Zuri's damaged heart, had been replaced with vitamin D capsules. "She did research," Janet said grimly, examining each substitution. "These vitamins match the original medications almost perfectly in appearance. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge would know exactly how to source supplements that looked identical to the real thing." Zuri sank onto the couch, the full scope of Madison's deception washing over her. She works in pharmaceutical sales. She knows about drug interactions, about how medications work in the body. She knew exactly what she was doing. "We need to call the police now," Janet said firmly. "But first, let me ask, do you have somewhere safe to go? Because when Madison realizes you know, her reaction could be unpredictable." Before Zuri could answer, they heard the distinctive sound of Madison's key in the front door lock. She wasn't supposed to be home for hours. The sales meeting in Boulder should have kept her busy until late afternoon. Both women froze, Janet still holding the evidence of Madison's crime in her gloved hands. "Zuri?" Madison's voice called out, bright and cheerful as always. "I finished my meetings early. I brought Thai food for lunch." The sound of Madison's heels clicking across the hardwood floor toward the kitchen gave them precious seconds. Janet quickly returned the pills to their bottles and shoved them back into the medicine cabinet, while Zuri tried to compose herself, to look like someone who hadn't just discovered she'd been the victim of attempted murder. Madison appeared in the bathroom doorway, her arms full of takeout bags, her smile as warm and genuine-looking as ever. But now Zuri could see what she'd missed before. The calculating way Madison's eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail, assessing the situation for threats or opportunities. "Oh, I didn't know you had company." Madison's voice carried just the right note of surprise and mild concern. "I'm Madison, Zuri's sister-in-law. Are you feeling all right, Zuri? You look pale." Janet stepped forward, her professional demeanor intact. "I'm Janet Rodriguez, a nurse practitioner. Dr. Chen asked me to check on Zuri after some concerning test results." The change in Madison's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of something cold and predatory before the mask of concern slipped back into place. "Test results? What kind of test results? Zuri, you didn't mention feeling unwell this morning." "Just routine blood work. Dr. Chen wants to adjust my medication dosages." "Adjust your dosages? But you've been so stable lately. I've been so careful to make sure you take everything exactly as prescribed." The word careful hung in the air like an accusation. Janet and Zuri exchanged a glance, both recognizing the slip. Madison had just admitted to controlling Zuri's medication routine, something that took on a completely different meaning now that they knew what was actually in those bottles. "Well," Madison continued, her smile becoming brighter and more fixed, "I suppose the doctors know best. Should I prepare your medications for this evening as usual?" It was a test. Madison was testing whether they suspected anything, whether the blood results had revealed her deception. Zuri realized that her next words could determine whether she lived or died, because if Madison felt cornered, there was no telling what she might do to protect herself. "That would be great," Zuri said carefully, "just like always."
Madison's smile relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained watchful. Of course, I'll take care of everything. I always do. As Madison disappeared into the kitchen to prepare their lunch, Janet quietly took photos of the medicine bottles with her phone and texted a message to someone, presumably calling for police backup. But Zuri realized they had a bigger problem. They were trapped in the apartment with someone who had been trying to kill her for months, someone who was growing increasingly suspicious that her secret had been discovered. The truth was unveiled, but the danger was just beginning.
The Thai food sat cooling on Zuri's dining table as three women engaged in the most dangerous game of pretense any of them had ever played. Madison chattered about her morning meetings, her voice carrying its usual warmth, while Janet checked her phone discreetly, and Zuri tried not to stare at the sister-in-law who had been systematically poisoning her for months. The medical device company in Thornton is really impressive, Madison was saying, spooning pad thai onto plates with practiced domesticity. They're developing new cardiac monitoring technology that could revolutionize how we track heart patients at home. I immediately thought of you, Zuri. Imagine being able to get real-time data about how your medications are working. The casual mention of cardiac monitoring sent a chill down Zuri's spine. Had Madison been studying her condition, learning new ways to manipulate her health? The woman's pharmaceutical background was becoming more sinister with each revelation. Janet's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, then looked meaningfully at Zuri. Actually, I should probably head back to the hospital soon. Dr. Chen wanted me to report back on your status. Oh, but you just got here, Madison protested, her smile never wavering. At least stay for lunch. I got plenty of food. That's very kind, but I really should. Madison's phone rang, interrupting Janet's polite refusal. The ringtone was custom, the opening notes of Sweet Caroline, and Madison's face immediately tensed when she saw the caller ID. I should take this. It's work-related. She stepped into the living room, but her voice carried clearly through the thin walls. Marcus, why are you calling my work phone? Zuri's heart raced as she heard her brother's name. Janet leaned closer, both women straining to hear the conversation. No, I haven't found my own place yet. What do you mean, what did I do to Zuri? That's ridiculous, Marcus. I've been taking excellent care of her. You're being paranoid again, just like when we were married. The conversation grew more heated, Madison's carefully modulated voice beginning to crack around the edges. Through the gap between the living room and kitchen, Zuri could see Madison pacing, her free hand clenched into a fist. Fine, Madison said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If that's how you want to play this, Marcus, then maybe it's time Zuri knew the truth about what really happened to our marriage. She ended the call and returned to the kitchen, but the mask of pleasant domesticity had slipped considerably. Her smile looked painted on now, and there was something wild in her eyes that made both Zuri and Janet instinctively lean away from her. Everything okay? Zuri asked, carefully. Oh, you know how Marcus gets. He's been having some psychological issues since our separation. I didn't want to worry you with the details, but he's been making increasingly paranoid accusations about me. His therapist says it's a common response to relationship failure, projecting blame onto others to avoid taking responsibility for his own actions. What kind of accusations? Zuri asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Madison sat down at the table, her movements suddenly precise and deliberate. He's convinced himself that I somehow manipulated his medications. It's completely absurd, of course, but he's become obsessed with the idea. He even went to his doctor claiming I was poisoning him. She laughed, but the sound was brittle and wrong. Can you imagine? As if I would ever hurt someone I cared about. The audacity of the statement, spoken while sitting across from someone she had, in fact, been poisoning for months, was breathtaking. But Zuri was beginning to understand the full scope of Madison's psychological manipulation. She didn't just replace medications, she created entire alternate realities where her victims questioned their own sanity. That must have been very difficult for both of you, Janet said neutrally. Medical concerns can create a lot of stress in relationships. Exactly. Madison's eyes lit up as if she had found an ally.
That's why I've been so careful with Zuri's health routine. I've seen how medical anxiety can destroy families. I refuse to let that happen again. She was rewriting history in real time, casting herself as the protective caregiver while subtly planting seeds of doubt about Marcus's mental state. If Zuri hadn't spoken to her brother directly, she might have started questioning his version of events. Janet's phone buzzed again, a text message that she glanced at quickly, then standing up. I really do need to get back to the hospital now. Zuri, why don't you walk me to my car? I have some additional instructions from Dr. Chen. Madison's eyes sharpened. What kind of instructions? I can help Zuri with whatever medical management she needs. Just routine follow-up protocols, Janet said smoothly. Nothing complicated. As they headed toward the door, Madison called out, Zuri, don't forget to take your evening medications. I'll have them ready for you when you get back. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Madison was reminding her that she still controlled access to what Zuri believed were life-saving medications. The psychological control was as insidious as the physical harm. Outside, Janet immediately pulled out her phone. Detective Sarah Murphy is on her way along with a uniformed officer. They should be here within 10 minutes. We need to get you somewhere safe.
I can't leave. If Madison realizes I'm not coming back, she'll destroy the evidence. And what if she goes after Marcus next, or finds some other victim? Zuri, this woman has been trying to kill you for months. Your safety has to be the priority. But as they stood on the sidewalk debating their next move, Madison appeared at the apartment window, watching them with undisguised suspicion. Any hope of a discreet police investigation was rapidly disappearing. Janet's phone rang, Detective Murphy calling to coordinate their approach. While Janet spoke to the police, Zuri found herself studying the building that had been her home for 3 years. Every memory was now tainted by the knowledge of Madison's deception. The cozy dinners where Madison had insisted on cooking, claiming she enjoyed taking care of family. The times Madison had brought her medications when she was feeling too tired to get them herself. The weekly organization sessions where Madison had insisted on checking expiration dates and ensuring everything was properly stored. It had all been part of a systematic plan to control and ultimately eliminate her. Detective Murphy wants to know if you have any idea what Madison's ultimate goal might have been. Was there something she stood to gain from your death? Zuri had been so focused on the how of Madison's actions that she hadn't fully considered the why. But now, pieces began falling into place. Madison had no job stability, no place to live after the separation from Marcus. She'd been staying in Zuri's apartment rent-free, living off the savings from her marriage. If Zuri died of apparent heart failure, a plausible outcome given her medical history, Madison would likely be seen as the grieving sister-in-law who had tried so hard to care for her. But there was more to it than just financial opportunism. Zuri remembered conversations where Madison had seemed almost excited about medical emergencies, asking detailed questions about hospital procedures and emergency protocols. She had volunteered to go to doctor's appointments, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that seemed caring at the time, but now felt voyeuristic. Madison enjoyed the role of caregiver, but she needed a victim to care for. By slowly poisoning Zuri, she created an increasingly dependent patient while positioning herself as the devoted family member, making heroic efforts to help. There's something else, Zuri told Janet. Madison has been documenting everything. She keeps detailed records of my symptoms, my medication schedule, even my mood changes. She told me it was to help track my condition, but now I think she was creating evidence of her own devotion. The psychological complexity was staggering. Madison wasn't just trying to kill her. She was constructing an elaborate narrative where she would emerge as the tragic heroine who had fought valiantly to save a beloved family member. The documentation would serve as proof of her dedication, making any future accusations seem ungrateful and cruel. As they watched from the sidewalk, Madison moved away from the window, but they could see lights going on and off throughout the apartment. She was clearly searching for something, possibly looking for evidence that they had discovered her deception. "We need to get back in there," Zuri said urgently. "She's going to destroy everything." "Absolutely not. That woman is cornered and dangerous. We wait for the police." But waiting felt impossible when years of evidence were potentially being destroyed floors above us.
Zuri thought about the detailed charts Madison had created, the way she had photographed Zuri's medication schedule for backup purposes, the journal she claimed to keep tracking Zuri's progress. All of it would be valuable evidence if it still existed when the police arrived. A black sedan pulled up to the curb and Detective Murphy emerged with her partner. She was a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and sharp eyes that immediately assessed the situation with professional competence. "Ms. Wolfe, I'm Detective Murphy. We need to get you somewhere safe while we handle the situation." "She's destroying evidence right now," Zuri protested. "Every minute we wait outside, she's getting rid of proof of what she's done." "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but confronting someone who's been attempting to poison you is not safe under any circumstances. We're going to handle this professionally and carefully." As if summoned by their conversation, Madison appeared on the third-floor balcony of Zuri's apartment. She was holding what looked like a small pile of papers, and as we watched in horror, she began tearing them into pieces and letting the fragments scatter on the wind. The evidence of her elaborate deception was literally blowing away in the autumn breeze, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. The complexity of Madison's psychological manipulation was becoming clear, but proving it in court would be infinitely more difficult if she succeeded in destroying the documentation of her actions. The game had shifted again. Madison knew she was caught, and now she was focused on controlling the narrative one final time. The question was no longer whether she had been poisoning Zuri, but whether there would be enough evidence left to ensure justice and to prevent her from finding another victim to care for in the future.
Detective Murphy was speaking into her radio, coordinating with backup units, when Madison's voice suddenly boomed from the third-floor balcony through what appeared to be a bullhorn she'd retrieved from somewhere in the apartment. "Zuri, I know you're down there. We need to talk." The entire street seemed to freeze. Neighbors began appearing at windows and doorways, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from the first floor stepped onto her balcony, looking confused and concerned. This was exactly the kind of public spectacle that would complicate everything. "Zuri, I don't know what lies people have been telling you, but I've been nothing but devoted to your pair." Madison's amplified voice carried an edge of hysteria that made Detective Murphy's hand instinctively move toward her weapon. "I've sacrificed everything to make sure you stay healthy." Janet grabbed Zuri's arm. "She's creating a narrative for the neighbors, making herself look like the victim of false accusations." Detective Murphy spoke sharply into her radio. "I need that backup here now. We have a potentially unstable subject with access to a vulnerable victim's living space." But Madison wasn't finished. "Your brother Marcus is having a psychological breakdown. He's been spreading vicious lies about me because he can't handle the failure of our marriage, and now he's dragged you into his delusions." The manipulation was masterful and terrifying. Madison was preemptively discrediting any accusations by framing Marcus as mentally unstable and Zuri as his misguided accomplice. To anyone listening who didn't know the truth, she sounded like a concerned family member being persecuted by vengeful relatives. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the balcony and come down here to talk," Detective Murphy called up, her voice professionally calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Who are you? Why are there police officers at my family member's home? Zuri, what have you done?" The way Madison phrased the question was calculated to make Zuri feel guilty, as if seeking help for attempted poisoning was somehow a betrayal of family loyalty. Even now, even caught red-handed, Madison was trying to maintain psychological control. Zuri stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "Madison, I know about the pills. I know what you've been doing." The silence that followed was deafening. For nearly 30 seconds, Madison said nothing, and Zuri could see her silhouette on the balcony perfectly still. When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the hysteria, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I see. So that's how we're going to play this." Without another word, Madison disappeared back into the apartment. Detective Murphy immediately called for additional units and began coordinating with building security to gain access to Zuri's floor. But they all knew that whatever Madison was doing inside the apartment, they were already too late to prevent it. "Is there another way out of your building?" Detective Murphy asked urgently.
"Is there another way out of your building?" Detective Murphy asked urgently. "Fire escape on the backside, but it's old and probably hasn't been maintained. There's also a stairwell that connects to the building next door through the basement, but you need a key." "Does Madison have access to any keys like that?" Zuri's heart sank. "She has copies of all my keys. I gave them to her when she moved in case of emergencies." Detective Murphy's expression grew grim. She could already be gone. But as they stood debating their next move, smoke began drifting from one of Zuri's apartment windows. Not the thick black smoke of a dangerous fire, but the thin gray wisps that suggested someone was burning papers in a controlled way. "She's destroying more evidence," Janet said grimly. "Or creating a distraction," Detective Murphy replied, speaking rapidly into her radio to request fire department backup. The next few minutes unfolded with surreal intensity. Fire trucks arrived with sirens wailing, drawing even more neighborhood attention. Detective Murphy and her partner gained access to the building through the superintendent, who lived on site and had master keys. Janet insisted on staying close to Zuri, monitoring her heart rate and blood pressure as the stress of the situation took its toll on her already compromised cardiovascular system. But the real crisis came when Detective Murphy's voice crackled through the radio with an update that made everyone's blood run cold. "Apartment is empty. Subject is not here, but we have a major problem." "What kind of problem?" the dispatcher asked. "The apartment has been systematically ransacked, and there are signs of accelerant use near what appears to be a makeshift laboratory setup in the kitchen. We're going to need hazmat and a bomb squad." A laboratory. Madison hadn't just been replacing pills. She'd been actively manufacturing something in Zuri's own kitchen. The scope of the deception was far beyond what any of them had imagined. "Everyone needs to evacuate this building immediately," Detective Murphy's voice continued through the radio. "We don't know what chemicals or compounds might be involved." As residents began streaming out of the building, carrying pets and hastily grabbed belongings, Zuri felt a crushing sense of violation. Not only had Madison been poisoning her, but she'd been using Zuri's home as some kind of illegal drug manufacturing operation. Every meal they'd shared, every conversation in that kitchen had taken place mere feet from whatever Madison had been concocting. "Ms. Wolfe," Detective Murphy appeared at her side, having left the apartment to coordinate the evacuation. "We found some disturbing items upstairs. I need to ask you some questions about Madison's background and capabilities." "What kind of items?" "Pharmaceutical reference books, detailed charts of your medical history going back years, and what appears to be a journal documenting your daily symptoms and reactions to various compounds." The words hit Zuri like physical blows. Madison hadn't just been replacing her medications randomly. She'd been conducting some kind of systematic experiment, documenting the effects of different substances on Zuri's body. She'd been treated like a laboratory animal in her own home. "There's more," Detective Murphy continued grimly. "We found evidence that Madison has been researching other individuals with chronic medical conditions. Names, addresses, medical information. It appears she may have been planning to expand her activities." The horror of it was overwhelming. Madison wasn't just a woman who had snapped under the stress of divorce. She was a predator who specifically targeted vulnerable people with medical conditions. Zuri had been a test case, a prototype for something much larger and more sinister. "One of the names on her list," Detective Murphy said carefully, "is a Marcus Wolfe in Seattle. Your brother?" Zuri's knees nearly gave out. Madison hadn't been finished with Marcus when she left their marriage. She'd been planning to continue her psychological and medical torture from a distance. Moving in with Zuri hadn't just been about finding a place to stay, it had been about positioning herself to harm multiple family members simultaneously. Janet, who had been monitoring Zuri's vital signs throughout the evacuation, suddenly looked alarmed. "Detective, I need to get Zuri to a hospital immediately. Her heart rate is becoming dangerously irregular and her blood pressure is spiking." But as they prepared to leave for the hospital, Detective Murphy's radio crackled with an update that made the crisis exponentially worse. "Detective Murphy, we have a situation. The suspect has been spotted at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. She's apparently trying to access the cardiac unit, claiming to be bringing medication to a patient." The hospital. Madison had gone to the one place where Zuri felt safe, where Dr. Chen practiced, where vulnerable cardiac patients received treatment. She was either trying to destroy more evidence of her interactions with Zuri's medical team, or she was looking for new victims.
She knows the hospital, Zuri gasped, her chest tightening with both physical distress and emotional terror. I've taken her to appointments there. She knows the layout, the staff, the patients who come for cardiac rehabilitation. The realization that Martha and her other friends from the cardiac program might be in danger pushed Zuri past her breaking point. Her vision began to tunnel, and she could feel her heart racing in the irregular, dangerous pattern that Dr. Chen had always warned her about. "We need an ambulance here now," Janet called urgently. "She's going into cardiac distress." As EMTs arrived and began working to stabilize Zuri's heart rhythm, Detective Murphy coordinated with hospital security to locate Madison before she could harm anyone else. The crisis had evolved from a single case of attempted murder into a citywide manhunt for a woman who had turned healthcare into a weapon. But even as the ambulance rushed toward the very hospital where Madison had last been seen, Zuri realized that the greatest crisis wasn't the immediate medical emergency or even the threat Madison posed to others. The greatest crisis was the complete shattering of her ability to trust anyone with her life, her health, or her safety. The woman who had made her breakfast every morning, who had organized her medications with such apparent care, who had listened to her fears about her health and offered comfort, that same woman had been methodically killing her while documenting the process for future reference. As the ambulance sirens wailed through Denver traffic, Zuri closed her eyes and tried to process a truth that seemed too evil to be real. Sometimes the people who seem most dedicated to keeping you alive are the very ones planning your death.
The emergency room at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as medical staff worked to stabilize Zuri's heart rhythm. Dr. Chen had been called in immediately, and his familiar presence in the trauma bay provided the first moment of genuine safety Zuri had felt in hours. But even as the cardiac monitors showed her heart rate returning to a more stable pattern, the emotional crisis was far from over. "The good news is that your heart is responding well to the medication," Dr. Chen said, adjusting her IV drip. "Your body remembers how to function properly once we get the right drugs back into your system. The damage from Madison's deception appears to be reversible." "What about the long-term effects? Months without proper medication?" "We'll need to do more comprehensive testing, but your heart is remarkably resilient. The bigger concern right now is making sure we've identified everything Madison may have given you instead of your prescribed medications." Janet, who had accompanied them in the ambulance, looked up from her tablet where she'd been coordinating with Detective Murphy. "The hazmat team found more than just vitamin substitutes in your apartment. There were samples of several compounds we can't identify yet. The lab is running tests, but it could take days to get results." The implications were terrifying. Madison hadn't just been withholding Zuri's medications, she'd been actively experimenting with unknown substances, using Zuri's body to test compounds whose effects were completely unpredictable. The journal Detective Murphy had mentioned was apparently filled with detailed observations about how Zuri responded to different chemical combinations. "Dr. Chen," a nurse appeared at the door, looking anxious. "Security needs to speak with you about the woman who was asking about Miss Wolfe earlier. They have some concerns about what she might have accessed." Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "What kind of access?" "She apparently had detailed knowledge about Ms. Wolfe's medical history and treatment protocols. She was asking specific questions about other cardiac patients, claiming she was doing research for a pharmaceutical company." The nurse's words sent a chill through the room. Madison hadn't just come to the hospital to flee. She'd been gathering information about other vulnerable patients, possibly identifying new targets for her twisted experiments. "Where is she now?" Jenna asked urgently. "That's the problem. She left about 20 minutes before the police arrived, but security footage shows her accessing several restricted areas, including the pharmacy storage room." The pharmacy. Madison had pharmaceutical knowledge and now potential access to a much wider range of drugs than the simple substitutions she'd been making in Zuri's apartment. The scope of potential harm had expanded exponentially. Dr. Chen immediately called hospital administration while Janet contacted Detective Murphy with the update. But as they coordinated the official response, Zuri found herself thinking about something Madison had said during her bullhorn speech. "I've sacrificed everything to make sure you stay healthy." Even in the middle of being caught, Madison had maintained the delusion that she was helping rather than harming.
The psychological disconnect was so profound that Zuri realized Madison probably genuinely believed her own narrative. She wasn't a villain in her own mind. She was a misunderstood caregiver whose efforts weren't properly appreciated. "She's not finished," Zuri said suddenly, interrupting the flurry of phone calls and coordination. "Madison isn't running away. She's escalating." "What do you mean?" Dr. Chen asked, lowering his phone. "Think about what drives her. She needs to be needed. She needs to be the hero who saves people. If she can't do that with me anymore, she'll find someone else. Someone who needs saving even more desperately." Janet, who looked up from her tablet, understanding dawning in her expression. "The cardiac unit. She was asking about patients in the cardiac unit." "Not just any patients," Zuri continued, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. "She would want someone with a more severe condition than mine. Someone whose family would be even more grateful for her help. Someone who—" She stopped mid-sentence as the full implication hit her. "Martha. She was always asking about Martha during our conversations about cardiac rehab. She knows Martha lives alone, that her family is in another state, that she's been struggling with medication compliance since her last heart attack." Dr. Chen immediately pulled up patient records, while Janet contacted Detective Murphy with Martha's information. But Zuri knew they might already be too late. Madison had a head start, detailed knowledge of Martha's routine from their conversations, and now potential access to hospital-grade pharmaceuticals. Martha Rodriguez, 72 years old, lives at Sunset Manor Assisted Living. She was discharged yesterday for a routine pacemaker check. Her next appointment isn't for 2 weeks. "Sunset Manor is only 15 minutes from here," Janet said grimly. "If Madison left the hospital 20 minutes ago—" The math was terrifying. Madison could already be at Martha's facility, armed with whatever she'd taken from the hospital pharmacy and a carefully crafted story about being a concerned friend from Zuri's cardiac rehabilitation program. But as they prepared to contact the assisted living facility, Zuri realized something that changed everything. "Wait, I know how Madison thinks. I know exactly what story she'd tell to get access to Martha."
"What do you mean?" Dr. Chen asked. "She'd say I was in the hospital, that I was worried about Martha, and asked her to check on her. She'd bring medications, claiming they were from Dr. Chen. She'd have all the right information to make her story believable because she's heard me talk about Martha dozens of times." The realization was both terrifying and empowering. For months, Madison had used Zuri's trust and openness against her, turning casual conversations into intelligence gathering for future manipulation. But now, for the first time, Zuri understood Madison's methods well enough to predict her next moves. "I need to call Martha," Zuri said, reaching for the hospital phone. "Zuri, you're still recovering from a cardiac episode. You need to rest and let the police handle this." "Dr. Chen, Martha won't trust the police. She's from a generation that's suspicious of authority figures. But she'll trust me. And if Madison hasn't gotten to her yet, I might be the only one who can warn her in a way she'll actually believe." After a brief debate, Dr. Chen agreed to let Zuri make the call, but only with Janet monitoring her vital signs and the conversation being recorded for the police investigation. The phone at Sunset Manor rang 4 times before someone answered. "Sunset Manor, this is Beverly." "Beverly, this is Zuri Wolfe. I'm calling about Martha Rodriguez. Is she available to speak?" "Oh, Zuri, how nice to hear from you. Martha just had a visitor, actually, a lovely woman who said she was your sister-in-law. She brought some medication that she said you were worried Martha might have forgotten to pick up." Zuri's heart rate spiked, setting off alarms on the cardiac monitor. "Beverly, listen to me very carefully. That woman is not my sister-in-law, and whatever medication she brought is not safe. You need to call 911 immediately and make sure Martha doesn't take anything that woman gave her." "What? I don't understand. She seems so nice, and she knew so much about both of you. She even brought flowers and—" "Beverly, please, this is life or death. Call the police right now. I'm going to stay on the line." What followed were the longest 10 minutes of Zuri's life. Beverly, confused but alarmed by the urgency in Zuri's voice, called 911 on another line while keeping Zuri connected. Through the phone, Zuri could hear Beverly explaining the situation to emergency dispatchers, the sound of sirens approaching, and finally the voice she'd been desperate to hear. "Zuri? Is that really you?" Martha's voice, weak but alert, came through the phone. "Martha, are you okay? Did you take any medication from the woman who visited?" "No, thank goodness. Something about her made me uncomfortable. She was asking too many personal questions, and she seemed disappointed when I said I was feeling better lately. Who asks someone to feel worse?" The insight was profound. Martha, with her decades of life experience and natural intuition, had recognized something predatory in Madison's behavior, even without understanding the full context. It was the kind of wisdom that came from years of dealing with people, the ability to sense when someone's concern wasn't genuine. "The police are here now," she continued. "They're talking to that woman in the lobby. She's claiming there's been some misunderstanding, but they're not buying it." Detective Murphy's voice came through Janet's phone at the same moment. "We have her in custody. She had a pharmacy bag full of cardiac medications that weren't prescribed to her, along with syringes and detailed notes about the patient she was planning to visit." The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the realization of how close they'd come to disaster. If Martha had been more trusting, if Beverly had been willing to listen to Zuri's warning, if Detective Murphy had been even 15 minutes slower. "There's something else," Detective Murphy continued through Janet's phone. "Madison is asking to speak with Zuri. She claims she has information about other victims that she'll only share with her." The request was clearly another manipulation tactic, one final attempt to maintain some form of control over Zuri, even from police custody. But as Zuri considered it, she realized that this might be the breakthrough moment she needed, not just for the investigation, but for her own healing. "I'll do it," Zuri said firmly, "but not because she's asking, because I have questions of my own and I deserve answers." Dr. Chen looked concerned, but Janet nodded approvingly. Sometimes the best way to break free from a manipulator's psychological hold is to confront them when they no longer have power over you. For the first time since the nightmare began, Zuri felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Genuine strength. Not the carefully managed energy she'd been surviving on while being slowly poisoned, but real, clear-minded determination. Madison had spent months making Zuri question her own body, her own perceptions, her own judgment. But now, with proper medications flowing through her system and the truth finally exposed, Zuri was ready to reclaim the power that Madison had systematically stolen from her. The breakthrough wasn't just medical. It was psychological and emotional. Zuri was no longer Madison's victim. She was a survivor who understood her enemy well enough to prevent future harm and strong enough to face the truth about what had been done to her.
3 hours later, Zuri sat across from Madison in the sterile interrogation room at the Denver Police Department, separated by a metal table and the weight of months of deception. The transformation in Madison was startling. Gone was the carefully maintained facade of the caring sister-in-law, replaced by someone who looked simultaneously defiant and desperate. Detective Murphy and Janet flanked Zuri, while Madison's court-appointed attorney sat silently beside her client, clearly overwhelmed by the scope of the charges. The evidence bags on the table contained the vitamins that had replaced Zuri's heart medications, the unknown compounds found in her kitchen, and the hospital medications Madison had stolen in her final attempt to find a new victim. "You wanted to talk," Zuri said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm here." Madison's eyes, which had once seemed warm and caring, now held a calculating coldness that made Zuri wonder how she'd ever missed it.
You don't understand what you've done, Zuri. You've destroyed everything I was trying to build. What you were trying to build? Zuri leaned forward slightly. You were killing me, Madison, slowly and systematically killing me. I was helping you. Madison's voice rose, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. Do you have any idea how boring your life was before I moved in? How stagnant you'd become? You were just existing, going through the motions, not really living. The audacity of the statement was breathtaking, but Zuri recognized it now for what it was: Madison's complete inability to see her victims as anything other than objects for her manipulation. So you decided to poison me to make my life more exciting? I gave you purpose. I gave you someone who cared about your health, who paid attention to your needs. When was the last time anyone made your medical care their priority before I moved in? Detective Murphy started to intervene, but Zuri held up a hand. She needed to hear this, needed to understand the full scope of Madison's delusion. You're right that I was living a quiet life, Zuri said carefully, but it was my life, my choice, my routine, my health to manage. Your health was deteriorating. You were having symptoms you weren't reporting to your doctor. You were skipping exercise sessions when you felt tired. You needed someone to take charge, to make sure you were getting proper care. By replacing my heart medication with vitamins? Madison's attorney placed a warning hand on her client's arm, but Madison shook her off. The medications were making you dependent, passive. I was weaning you off them gradually, helping your body learn to function naturally while monitoring your progress. The clinical way Madison described systematically poisoning her was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire conversation. She had convinced herself that attempted murder was a form of medical intervention, that slow poisoning was somehow therapeutic. What about the other compounds? Detective Murphy interjected. The ones we found in Miss Wolfe's kitchen that aren't vitamins. Madison's expression shifted, becoming almost proud. Herbal supplements adapted for cardiac patients. I was developing a natural treatment protocol that could help people like Zuri reduce their dependence on pharmaceutical interventions. Without their knowledge or consent? Janet added grimly. Patients don't always know what's best for them. That's why they need caregivers who can make difficult decisions on their behalf. Zuri felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Madison wasn't just delusional. She was completely convinced that her victims were incapable of managing their own lives. In Madison's world, sick people existed to be subjects for her experiments, grateful recipients of her twisted form of care. What about Martha? Zuri asked quietly. What was your plan for her? For the first time, Madison hesitated. Martha is elderly and alone. Her medication management is inconsistent. She needed someone to ensure she was getting proper care. You mean she needed someone to experiment on? I mean, she needed someone who understood that traditional medical approaches aren't always effective for elderly patients with complex cardiac conditions. The protocols I was developing could have helped her achieve better quality of life. By poisoning her, like you poisoned me? Madison's face flushed with anger. You're so ungrateful. Do you realize how much time and energy I invested in your care? How many hours I spent researching your condition, tracking your symptoms, adjusting your treatment plan? The word ungrateful hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even now, facing multiple felony charges and overwhelming evidence of her crimes, Madison expected gratitude for the months of systematic abuse. The psychological manipulation was so profound that she genuinely believed her victims owed her thanks for slowly killing them. I spent months feeling like I was dying, Zuri said, her voice growing stronger. My heart was failing. I couldn't concentrate at work. I was exhausted all the time. I thought my condition was deteriorating, and I was terrified. But you came to depend on me, Madison said, leaning forward eagerly. You let me take care of you. You trusted me with the most intimate details of your health. That trust created a bond between us that you never had with anyone else. The revelation was sickening in its clarity. Madison hadn't just been trying to control Zuri's physical health. She'd been deliberately creating emotional dependence. The fear, confusion, and physical symptoms had made Zuri more vulnerable, more grateful for Madison's apparent care, more willing to surrender control over her own life. You made me sick so I would need you, Zuri said, the full scope of the psychological manipulation finally becoming clear. I made you aware of how much you needed proper care, Madison corrected. Before I moved in, you were taking your health for granted. You weren't appreciating how precious and fragile your cardiac function really is. Detective Murphy leaned forward. Miss Chen, are you admitting that you deliberately altered Miss Wolfe's medications with the intent to make her dependent on your care? Madison's attorney finally managed to interrupt. My client has said enough. We're not answering any more questions without proper legal consultation. But Madison ignored her lawyer, her eyes fixed on Zuri with an intensity that was genuinely frightening. You felt more alive during those months than you had in years. You had purpose, direction, someone who truly cared about every aspect of your well-being. And now you're throwing it all away because you can't handle the level of intimacy that real care requires? The twisted logic was breathtaking. Madison had reframed attempted murder as intimacy, systematic poisoning as care, and psychological manipulation as love. She wasn't just a criminal, she was someone whose entire worldview was built on the premise that other people existed to serve her need to be needed. But as Zuri listened to Madison's delusional explanations, she realized something transformative was happening. The fear and confusion that had dominated her life for months were being replaced by clarity and strength. Madison's words no longer had the power to make her question her own perceptions or doubt her own reality. You're right about one thing, Zuri said quietly. I am more alive now than I was 6 months ago, but not because of what you did to me, because of what I survived. Madison's expression faltered the first time in the conversation. I survived months of systematic poisoning. I survived having my trust betrayed by someone I welcomed into my home. I survived nearly dying because I was too trusting to suspect that someone claiming to care for me was actually killing me. Zuri's voice grew stronger with each word. And now I'm going to survive you going to prison and never having the opportunity to hurt anyone else the way you hurt me. The interview ended shortly after that, with Madison being led back to her cell to await formal charges. As Zuri walked out of the police station into the crisp Denver evening, she felt something she hadn't experienced in almost a year: complete confidence in her own body, her own judgment, and her own future. 3 months later, Zuri stood in her renovated apartment, which had been thoroughly cleaned and redecorated after the hazmat team's investigation. The kitchen, where Madison had conducted her experiments, now held new appliances and a completely different layout. The medicine cabinet had been replaced with a secure, locked system that only Zuri could access. Her health had recovered remarkably well. Dr. Chen monitored her progress closely, and the proper medications had restored her heart function to baseline levels. The psychological recovery had taken longer, but with the help of a therapist who specialized in trauma from medical abuse, Zuri was learning to trust her own perceptions again. Marcus had flown in from Seattle for Madison's sentencing hearing, where she received 15 years for attempted murder, aggravated assault, and pharmaceutical theft. The judge had been particularly harsh in her sentencing, noting that Madison's abuse of trust as a healthcare professional made her crimes especially heinous. Martha had become an even closer friend, bonded by their shared experience of nearly becoming Madison's victims. The older woman's intuitive recognition of Madison's predatory behavior probably saved her life, and her wisdom about trusting one's instincts had become a guiding principle for Zuri's recovery. Most importantly, Zuri had learned to distinguish between genuine care and manipulative control. Real support from family and friends felt different than Madison's suffocating attention. Healthy relationships enhanced her independence rather than undermining her, encouraged her strength rather than exploiting her vulnerabilities. On her 27th birthday, Exactly 1 year after Madison had moved in, Zuri hosted a dinner party in her restored apartment. The guests included Martha, Janet, Dr. Chen and his wife, Marcus, and several friends from work and cardiac rehabilitation. The conversation was lively, the laughter genuine, and the medications in Zuri's cabinet were exactly what they claimed to be. As she looked around the table at people who truly cared about her well-being, people who wanted her to be strong, independent, and healthy, Zuri realized that Madison had been wrong about everything except one crucial point. Her life was indeed more alive now, fuller and more meaningful than it had been before. Not because she had survived being slowly poisoned by someone she trusted, but because she had discovered her own resilience, learned to value her instincts, and built a support network based on mutual respect rather than manufactured dependence. The pills that had nearly killed her were gone. The person who had administered them was in prison, and Zuri Wolfe was not just surviving, she was thriving, stronger and more aware than ever before, living proof that even the most profound betrayals could be overcome by truth, courage, and the decision to reclaim one's own life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.